When it comes to writing, recording, and leading songs that embody the heartbeat of the church, there is no name more familiar or trusted than Matt Maher. So when it comes to musically celebrating Advent, the worshipful heartbeat of the church's Christmas celebration, there could be no musician better suited than Matt. Creating a new set list of songs simply titled The Advent of Christmas, I visited with the Dove Award-winning singer, songwriter, and thinker at his studio in East Nashville, Tennessee, as we explored all the facets of what it means to anticipate Christmas through celebrating Advent. This is a holiday edition of CCM Magazine's Features on Film, and I'm your host, Andrew Greer. So first thing I think about with Advent, like I grew up in a household, very evangelical Southern Baptist kind of tradition, but yet we had an Advent wreath on, our coffee table, and our parents stewarded us through that, but that was very unusual. And I think the celebration of Advent, and even just the knowledge of what is Advent, is kind of a lost art in our Christmas time.
And honestly, for me, in researching it, I was surprised at how, this sounds funny to say, how un-Catholic Advent is, in the sense that it, the whole universal church has traditionally had some kind of penitential season before the celebration of Christmas. I mean, the whole concept of having a Christian calendar year, it kind of builds into it times of fasting and times of feasting. There's supposed to be times where you, abstain from things that you love doing, so that you get in touch with your hunger more. And Advent was one of those times, but it was actually the whole, the Advent wreath was actually German Lutherans.
Really? Okay, and so that wasn't even from a Catholic background.
No. Which I was amazing, but it's the three purple is it's a very symbolic color.
Tell people why it's symbolic.
Well, it's because it's associated with royalty, number one. Number two, it's associated with an act of worship, because purple as a dye, we think of dyeing clothes as not being a big deal, but that's why it was reserved.
But everyone doesn't think about that. I mean, in our even church tradition now, modern church tradition, symbolism has been kind of extracted, and we could take that back to the Protestant Reformation and all this, kind of getting away from symbols as an effort to really focus on relationship with God, right?
What's most important.
Right, but you take away the symbolism and we've lost a little bit of our roadmap, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think the danger is that are we just ritualistic? Because that's how we're made. Because we build monuments, and we build structures, and we build forms. And if left alone in a vacuum to develop, Christianity is inherently liturgical, because human beings are inherently liturgical in a way.
Yeah, we work off a calendar.
Yeah, we work off of calendars. We create events, and liturgy is a Greek word which basically means work with the people. But there is such a thing as God's divine work, and how are we called to participate in that in the world? But then how does it show up in the worship that we create? But more so than, because we don't really create worship, it's more so we're entering into it.
Sure.
Because it's already happening in heaven. So Advent became this way of saying, okay, we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus, but we're also going to think about the fact that we're waiting for him to return, and how can we live in the tension of those two things.
Do you think in a culture, I think we're set up for immediate gratification. It's just part of how we interact with people nowadays. It's how we interact in our businesses, with our devices, with communication. So this idea of actually preparing, pause, prepare, anticipate, that's not something that is being cultivated in our lives naturally. Do you think that's a part of maybe the lack of Advent association with Christmas?
I think some of it is there's stuff that we do, and we've kind of fragmented our lives. So maybe some of the problem is that, it's sort of like you have these two archetypes in the Bible, in the story of Martha and Mary, right? And one loves to just sit at the feet of Jesus and just gaze at him, and the other one is busting her tail trying to get everything ready because there's people over. And my wife and I joke, because she's always like, you're like Mary and I'm like Martha. That's what my wife says, because she's very pragmatic and very focused. But I actually look at it and go, no, she's actually incredibly selfless. She has a great sense of hospitality because she's not content until everyone's taken care of. And I think, so to translate that with Christmas, if you're talking about a baby that's going to be born, or you're talking about having family over for the holidays, everybody knows how to prepare for that. Some of us get triggered just at the thought of
like panic attack?
Family coming over. But I think the reality is that we could look at, okay, what practices do you do on an interior level that help you prepare for life-changing events? And how could you begin to use those same set of practices and also embrace all these, sort of Americana cultural traditions that we've created, which are harmless.
Yeah.
They're good. Because nostalgia isn't a bad thing. And even sentiment, to a certain extent, it isn't bad. Isn't inherently like it. Too much of it, it's like sugar. Too much of it, it'll kill you.
Right.
But those things can be little encouragements that, if we sort of take the idea of practice and preparation, and then we take all these cultural things that we've sort of adopted as being, oh, that's Christmas.
Yeah.
And you put them together, I think what you could have is a time set aside before the birth of Jesus, where, as the world, in the West especially, as the days get shorter and colder and darker, the light grows brighter.
Isn't that interesting that we literally celebrate in our calendar, where we celebrate Christmas, is at the midnight of our seasons. I mean, it is the darkest time of the year, and yet we're celebrating our greatest light. And I wonder if it is that contrast that helps us. I wonder if that's why it's so poignant, why Christmas is so poignant, is partially because of where it does fall in our current calendar.
I think so, and I think, that's why, you could in some ways look at the early church and go, well, that makes sense why they moved it that way. They said, the light is born in the darkest time.
I think when you're talking about like the Christmas tree and the wreaths and the gifts and all that stuff actually being a conduit potentially to Christmas, rather than, they don't have to be a distraction. Because you do kind of see, especially within the church, within Christianity, this kind of hard line, like we'll either celebrate Christmas like the world or we'll celebrate Christmas like the church. What I hear you kind of saying is those things can actually join together, because there's nothing inherently evil about decorating a Christmas tree.
No, we're kind of beyond. It's just sort of like we're beyond that at this point. Like we're
because
we're all together. We live in a pluralistic society. Like we're all rubbing up against each other now. And somebody that doesn't go to church, doesn't know God, for some reason loves the day after Thanksgiving to turn on, a radio station that's just perpetually playing Christmas music. And do I really want to come at them heavy-handed going, no, it's the season of Advent, you shouldn't be doing that. Like the whole concept of wagging a finger at culture, I just think it just feels like a pointless use of energy.
It feels, though, that is a bit what our posture has become, a wagging posture. I mean, that's a good way to put it.
No, very much. And I think we should be focusing on the personal call to discipleship and holiness. And you should practice the season of Advent the way that you feel God is calling you to, and the way you feel God is calling your church to. But at the same time, I think there's a way in which we could do it that could actually be inviting in and of itself. And besides, you don't correct strangers. You don't. You correct people that you have a relationship with.
Right. Yeah.
And so, for me, I think all of this stuff. That's what I said. Like these are all little signs. You know, Christmas is the most Christian time of year.
Yeah. Right. You walk into Walmart and you're hearing, "Oh, come, let us adore Him."
Right.
We should be ecstatic.
Yeah, we should just be happy about
Yeah.
that. It's like people love. It's the only time of year everyone sings Christian music.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's not a ton of winter solstice like music.
Right.
It's all Christmas music.
Right.
Christ is in the name.
Yeah.
Christ Mass. So it's all Christian music. Most of it is joyful. A lot of it, even the stuff that, just the phrase "Merry Christmas."
Right.
It's a benediction.
Yeah.
You're literally extending a benediction to someone. You say, "Hey, Merry Christmas."
Yeah.
And you didn't have to say, "Can I stop and give you my personal testimony?"
Right.
You just gave a testimony.
Isn't that interesting?
In that phrase.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because I think, we live in a very divisive time, and lots of people for different reasons, I think, look at the church as something that they could use as an opportunity to push their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just don't see it that way. I think the whole world, I believe this, the whole world is built to long for Jesus.
Yeah.
So even when they don't know it. That's why else would I be a Christian?
Yeah, yeah. And Christmas culturally gives everyone a little permission, I think, to tap into what they're longing for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You grew up in Canada.
Yeah.
And grew up loving Christmas. Yes?
Yes.
Part of that was connection with your father and how much he loved Christmas. You lost your father last year.
I did.
How has that, and do you even know yet? I know you've experienced one Christmas without him. How has that colored this time of year?
I remember I worked at this church in Arizona for a long time, and one of the other worship pastors, one time at choir rehearsal, he came in and was just singing, "It's the most dysfunctional time of the year." And everyone laughed. And I thought it was funny, and at the same time, there was part of me in my 20s that was like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is what you mean. This is great.
Like, please.
Yeah. The reality is, the older you get, the more people you know that are in heaven. That's just the reality. We're all going to get to a point where we don't know anybody here anymore, but everybody's waiting for us. And I think holidays, but particularly Christmas, is a time of year where our connection, it's culturally, we are given permission more than any other season of the year to re-embrace the past. And I think that's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. So Christmas is the time of year where everybody's sort of given a key and said, here, unlock every memory you have and bring it all back into the present. Mm-hmm. And that can be a really healthy thing to do. It can also be a very difficult thing to do, because when you bring the past into the present, not all of it's good for nobody. And so for me, Christmas last year was very, very bittersweet. The word nostalgia, it comes from the basic concept of, I think, of being homesick. And homesickness was an actual disease during the Civil War. Men were dying
from homesickness.
And so for me, when I think about the nostalgia that we get during the Christmas season, for me, I always look at it, it's like it's spiritual homesickness. Because we're longing for something, a place where everything's reconciled, like the past, the memories that we have of childhood, of in our innocence, or, with our loved ones before we were separated, for whatever reason. So for me, Christmas was beautiful because I have 3 kids, and so it's very bittersweet in the sense that the magic of watching them embrace the reality of the season, and there's all the trappings of Christmas, but then there's the spiritual reality of them coming to realize, oh wow, we're celebrating the birthday of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the joy that they have for that. And then also now it's like, yeah, all my grandparents are in heaven, and now my dad's there. So for me, it was a bittersweet Christmas, but there was this really, it's a spiritual consolation. I was writing songs for this record during Christmas last year. And all throughout the Christmas season, I kept seeing this red cardinal in my backyard, in between my house and my studio, or when I was sitting at the kitchen at the kitchen table. And I was like, what's the deal? I was like, I'd never noticed. I was like, are there cardinals a lot here or whatever? And so in Christian tradition, a red cardinal always symbolizes that someone you love is praying for you. And so the whole making of this record, in particular, the writing this one song in the record, this red cardinals just kept popping up. And so it was bittersweet, but I'm grateful for the gift of my faith. I think without the gift of my faith, it would be very, very much more difficult.
You talk about the red cardinal, and I think, we so want to avoid a lot of times the mystery of life and the mystery of whole life, eternal life. And to think that the potential, I love you talking about the red cardinal, and the potential that being a symbol, or maybe being your dad, I don't know.
Oh, it's probably just me.
But it's amazing.
I have a goofy imagination.
But is it, well, we're given our imagination.
Well, we are.
We're gifted them.
Yeah.
So for me, and we are consoled by so many things that are so much more mysterious than we admit in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think we're in touch with it. I love that tap into mystery and the willingness, to accept that, maybe there's something to this.
I mean, the reality is my dad is now worshiping God for all of eternity. Mm-hmm. And the idea that in the midst of doing that, we know, that's what the book of Revelation shows us, is while they're doing that, they're also cheering on the church here on earth. It's powerful because in a way you're closer to someone than you ever have been. Because, a lot of us, especially when you talk about relationships with your parents, older generations, they didn't really talk about their faith a lot, and I never sat down and had a conversation with my dad about prayer, or, Dad wasn't like, tell me about when you wrote this song, what was God saying to you, but now the reality is that, there is the possibility on some deep, uncommunicated level of not those kind of direct exchanges, but just a sense of closeness, a sense of intimacy that in a way wasn't there before. And I'm very grateful for that.
Talk about cheering on, people who've gone before us cheering us on, but I love how, the record's called The Advent of Christmas. There's a children's book also titled The Advent of Christmas, and cheering on children in the spirit of Advent, and you talking about seeing your kids now start to embrace and incorporate the realities. Why is it important that we also help our children incorporate these ideas of Advent, that it's more than Christmas Day, or that we're leading up into something? Why do you think personally, you can speak for the children of the world, but if you want to just speak to your children.
Primarily it's entirely selfish, because I think that my kids have forced me indirectly to deal with all the paradoxes that exist in my faith. And as they get older, we'll have to wrestle with those more. Mm-hmm. The reality is we all go through points in our life where we just we go on autopilot. And you're like, well, that's the way it is. And kids, it's just not, well, why?
Yeah.
Why is it that way? Mm-hmm. And when you start talking about the birth of Jesus, there's a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. Like, why are angels in the middle of the desert? Who are these kings? What are they doing? Mm-hmm. How far is it to walk? Where are they walking from? Just so many questions. But then deeper questions of why was Jesus born in a manger? Yeah. I think for me, why did he come? And bedtime for me is it's just a sacred time, because I get to pray over each one of my kids, and just kind of get to process the end of the day with them. And also, as a parent, I appreciated short bedtime stories. So I really,
Christmas fits in that category?
I really wanted to write this as a bedtime storybook that you could read every night. Because that's the
in
thing.
under 5 minutes.
Kids get in a rut where they're. G.K. Chesterton has this great quote where he just talks about how kids.
Speaking of kids.
Yeah, speaking of kids, he talks about how children are just. They will drive you crazy when you do something. They're like, do it again, do it again, do it again, and Chesterton said, maybe God's the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe God doesn't get tired of what He's made, and maybe every morning He says to the sun, do it again. And maybe He says to the birds that sing that song again. And He says, it is perhaps true that God is eternally young, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we are. And I read that, I was like, but I think that's it in some way that, for me, you have to pass on your faith. You have to pass on what you have, because you do. You do whether you're trying to or not. I mean, that's what I've realized when as a parent, is that my kids are sponges, and every day I'm imparting something onto them. Mm-hmm. What am I imparting? Is it blessing? Am I being present? Am I neglecting them? Am I impatient? It's like whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm giving that to them. They come just open. They're just open. And so they also have a great sense of wonder, and I just want to fill them with as much of that as I can, and especially around the season.
You know, the first question I asked my parents about the Christmas story, what is a virgin?
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad. I'm surprised my daughter hasn't asked me that yet. I feel like she would ask that question. Just out of the three, boy, girl, boy, and she just, her personality is larger than the other two's combined.
Yeah.
It was her birthday several days ago, and she's in pre-K, and I love the story. Yeah, they sang happy birthday to her, and she said, thanks, guys. If anyone wants a picture with me, I'll be available later.
Did anyone take her up on it?
Yeah.
I love it. I like her.
Yeah. She's got spunk. She's awesome.
Love came down to Bethlehem while the world was sleeping. Love came down to make amends for all creation's weeping. He that sang the stars to light, he the word became a cry. Rejoice, glory to God, hallelujah, Gloria. King of heaven's highest state, child in lowly manger, is the privilege to forsake, to welcome in the stranger, born to heal the bonds of men, born that we'd be born born to heal the bonds of man, born that we'd be born again. Rejoice, glory to God, hallelujah. Heaven and nature singing together, glory to God, hallelujah. Heaven and nature, angels and shepherds, wise men and beggars, praise to the Savior forever and ever.